Have you seen Pulse? It's a 2001 horror film about ghosts invading the human world through the internet. The film begins on a ship where a woman is staring out to sea, recounting the events that led up to this moment. We hear a phone ringing and see distorted images of an office with a computer. The caller is Junko. She and her colleagues Michi and Toshio work at a plant nursery. They are worried that Taguchi hasn't been to work and isn't answering his phone. They are also waiting for Taguchi to finish the work on a floppy disk as the deadline is tomorrow. Michi takes it upon herself to go check on Taguchi. She takes a gloomy bus to his apartment, finds a key under a plant pot, enters, and starts to search for the disk. Someone stands up in the next room. It's Taguchi. They greet each other, and Michi tells him they have been worried. Taguchi apologizes and tells her where the disk is while picking up an Ethernet cable. Michi goes to find it, but his desk is too messy. After not getting a response from Taguchi, she goes back into the back room and discovers that Taguchi has casually hung himself with the cable. After an interview at the police station, the three colleagues are at a cafe talking about suicide and depression. Back at work, Michi is still affected by the event. The three colleagues decide to look at Taguchi's disk. They find a picture of him standing in front of the computer. They zoom in on a monitor and see a creepy reflection. Later that night while making coffee, Michi's TV suddenly freezes on a frazzled image while playing a buzzing sound, which scares her. Meanwhile, a student named Yuzuke decides to try to use the internet for the first time. He installs a dial-up program and tries to connect. Instead of connecting to the internet, his monitor shows him some lonely people in front of their computers. And eventually, a message asking, "Would you like to meet a ghost?" This freaks Yuzuke out, and he turns off the computer and has a smoke. Later that night, his computer turns on by itself while he is sleeping. He wakes up to see another image of a man in red, creepily sitting in the shadows. Again, he quickly turns it off. The next day at a university, he visits the IT department and tries to ask a student if a computer can connect to the internet itself. He doesn't get much of a response. Then a girl takes interest in his problem and advises him to bookmark or print screen the page that comes up. Yuzuke notes this down. At the office, Toshio answers the phone and hears a voice repeatedly saying help. He decides to take the gloomy bus at night to Taguchi's apartment. On his desk, he finds a printout that reads, "The Forbidden Room." He turns on the light to the next room to see an ash stain where Taguchi hung himself. He turns off the light, walks away, but then comes back and turns on the light again. Taguchi is standing there. Toshio starts to ask him what happened, but then Taguchi has disappeared. Toshio questions himself, saying, "What am I doing?" and leaves. On the way back, he passes through an apartment complex and notices a door with red tape around it. Of course, he goes to investigate. He enters a concrete basement and walks towards a dark corner. There is a small sofa there, and the wall lights up to show red marks covering it. He slowly turns around and sees a female figure, shrouded in darkness, slowly walk and stumble towards him. He falls back onto the sofa in horror, and then scrambles behind it. He looks under the sofa and sees nothing there. Then he looks up and shrieks in terror as the female spirit slowly peers over the edge of the sofa. Back at work the day after, Toshio doesn't turn up, and the ladies are worried. Michi wants to go look for him, but Junko convinces her to wait for a day. The next day, Toshio does arrive. He apologizes for being late, but is emotionless and ignores his colleagues. Later, while Michi leaves her apartment, she sees a woman in red seal her door with red tape. Back at Yuzuke's apartment, while he is looking through some magazines, his computer turns on by itself again and shows the man in red. The man moves off the screen and the shadow follows him. Yuzuke tries to follow the advice he has noted down, but panics and unplugs his computer. The next day, Yuzuke goes back to the IT department for help. He finds a computer showing many white dots floating around its screen. The girl from before sees him, and she introduces herself as Haruhe and offers to go over to take a look at his computer. They return to Yosuke's apartment, where he offers her a drink and tries to tidy up a bit. Haruhe asks him if he wants to use the internet to connect to people and expresses that people don't really want to connect online. They are like the dots on the program he saw earlier, all living separately. Back at the plant nursery, Michi lets her boss know that she is worried about Toshio and asks if she can go check on him. Her boss replies that words with good intentions often hurt people, and in turn, hurt yourself. The courageous choice is to not have friends like that. Michi ignores her boss and goes to see Toshio. Toshio reveals that he saw a horrible face, something he's never seen before. He mentions the Forbidden Room, and Michi is reminded of the Red Tape Room. Toshio sternly warns her not to dare go in there. The next day, Michi is leaving her apartment again. As she walks past an industrial area, the woman in red leaps to her death from a large tanker. Michi screams, and other onlookers come to check on all the commotion. Back at the university, Yuzuki is lost in the library and bumps into Haruhe, who is looking for books on phantoms. She takes her to the computer room and tells him that the screen with white dots and what he has been seeing on his computer might be related. Before she can explain more, a senior student arrives and gives Haruhe some work to do. Yosuke sees that they are busy and leaves. However, Haruhe chases after him and gives him a number, asking him to call her at any time. Yosuke returns to the library and does some research on ghosts. He then notices a dark silhouette peeking at him from behind a bookshelf. The senior student suddenly sits down next to him and asks if he can see it too, because it is really there. He then says Yosuke has to catch a dark figure to find out what it is. Yosuke tries, but fails. The student makes some tea for them and explains his theory that there's a finite capacity for spirits. When that space is full to the brim, he thinks the souls ooze into our world. Any means or device would suffice. It may take some time, and the presence at first may be weak, but not anymore. Once this process is started, it is permanent, and there is no turning back. It will spread all over the world. Yosuke doesn't believe him and leaves. Next, we see the boss of the plant nursery, using red tape to steal off a window. At work, Michi's making calls trying to find out where he is, while Junko is questioning why everyone is disappearing. Junko decides to go look for their boss. Michi tries to chase after her, but then there's a phone call. She answers to hear a voice, repeatedly saying help, which she suspects to be Toshio. Michi goes to find Toshio and sees him standing in the corner of a room. She rushes over to him, but he turns into an ash stain on the wall. We hear a voice continue to ask for help. Junko arrives at their boss's apartment and removes the red tape on the door. Meanwhile, Michi finds Junko is not back at work and follows her to their boss' apartment. She realizes that Junko has entered a forbidden room. She rushes in and sees Junko cowering on the floor and tries to help her up, but Junko scrambles around in fear. Michi finally manages to get her on her feet, but Junko backs away in fear as a spirit with long hair appears. Michi struggles to get them out of there and falls out the door. The spirit slowly floats towards Junko, who is petrified. Michi gets up and manages to get them both out. Michi takes Junko back to her apartment. Junko is traumatized by fear and repeatedly says help. Michi goes to grab some groceries for them, but when she goes to pay, she sees a shadow of the cashier behind a window. She rushes out of the store. Yosuke tries to call Haruhe, but there is no answer. He goes to look for her at the university, but she is not there. He sees a ghostly figure walking on one of the computer screens. Luckily, Haruhe also left her address on the note, so he goes to pay her a visit. He finds her dripping wet, wandering around aimlessly on the stairway saying they've disappeared and that she must run away somewhere. Yosuke calms her down and makes her drink in her apartment as she drives off. Haruhe then confesses that she has always wondered what it was like to die since she was a little girl. She tells him that she has always been alone and thought that when we die, we will live happily with everyone. But when she grew older, she realized that we might be alone after death too, and she can't bear that thought. Yosuke tries to be optimistic and say, "But we are alive, and not alone," to which Haruhi shows all the lonely people on her computer screens. Yosuke calls those people crazy and refuses to believe in ghosts. He wants to invent a pill so he can live forever. Haruhi thinks ghosts won't kill people because that will make more ghosts. They will make people immortal in their loneliness. Back at Michi's apartment, Junko is still in a bad state and panics when Michi is washing up, as she feels alone. Later that day, Michi wakes up from a nap to see Junko staring out of the balcony. She gets up to make them some coffee. Junko asks if she is going to die like this. Michi replies, "Of course not." Junko agrees and says she will keep living all alone, steps to the side, and turns to ash. Michi is in disbelief and starts calling out for her, but the wind blows the ash everywhere. She then tries to call her mother, but there is no answer. Next, we see Yosuke at an arcade. He turns around to see the place is empty. He tries to ring a bell for service. A shadow passes by in the background, and then right next to him, he watches as the shadow slowly turns around, and he rushes out of the arcade. On the way back to his apartment, he sees Haruhi smashing plant pots outside. She asks him to take her with him, as she is scared to be alone. He agrees, and they go to the train station. No one is around, and everything is out of service. They board an empty train, and Haruhi starts to question where everyone is. Yosuke tells her that he is here with her, and it doesn't matter if there's no one else. Suddenly, the train stops in the middle of nowhere, and Haruhi starts to panic again, saying she must go back. Yosuke pleads for her to stay put while he checks with the driver. As soon as he goes off, Haruhi gets off the train. Yosuke realizes and tries to run after her, but she is gone. Haruhi arrives back at her apartment and sees that most people on her computer screens have disappeared. She watches as the man in red removes a black bag from his head and shoots himself. She turns off the monitor, but it turns back on showing a live feed of a back of herself. She turns and heads towards the supposed camera. Her image jumps around as she gets closer until she says, "I'm not alone." Yosuke arrives at her apartment and shouts through the door, offering for them to live together so they won't be lonely. There's no reply, so he breaks down the door with a fire extinguisher, but Haruhi is nowhere to be seen. Outside, there is a TV broadcasting the details of all the missing people in Tokyo. Yosuke wanders around aimlessly and then goes to a vending machine for a drink. He notices a yellow car with someone resting on the steering wheel. It's Michi. He offers her a drink, and they sit down. She tells him that both of her parents didn't make it. They get to know each other talking about people in their lives while Yosuke fixes the car. He tells her that he has one friend, Haruhi, but he doesn't know where she is. Michi tests the car and it starts, so she offers to help him look for Haruhi. On the drive, Yosuke says this is the last stop. After that, they can go as far away as they can. He adds that he can sort of see the future. They look around her apartment for clues until Michi spots an abandoned factory out the window and suggests they look over there. They race into the factory. As they walk inside, Michi warns him not to go inside any rooms with red tape on the door. Then, they spot Haruhi up on a platform with a bag on her head. They quickly rush up there and see that Haruhi has a gun. She removes the bag from her head. Yosuke asks her to leave this place together with them, but she shoots herself. He runs over to her body and tries to call the emergency service, but of course, there is no answer. Michi and Yosuke return back to the car, but then realize they are out of gas, so he returns to the factory to find some. He pumps some petrol into a canister, but when he tries to close it, he slips and the cap rolls into a room with red tape on the doors. After he enters the room, the door closes on him. He picks up the cap, and a ghost appears across the room, stating that death is eternal loneliness, while walking towards him. Yosuke tries to open the door, but to no avail, so he tries to cover his eyes, saying he refuses to acknowledge death. But when he opens his eyes, the ghost is still there. As a last resort, he tries to catch the ghost, as the senior student told him a few days ago, hoping it will disappear. After his hands land on the ghost, it tells him that it is not an illusion. Yosuke falls to the floor, and the ghost gets ever closer, staring at him right in the face, longing for some company. Meanwhile, Michi notices something is wrong and goes to look for Yosuke. She sees the open door, forbidden room, and grasps her head in despair. But she then finds Yosuke sitting on the floor staring at the black patch of ash. He grabs the petrol canister and escapes back to the car with her. Michi drives through a desolate Tokyo where there is fire, smoke, and some bodies laid out on the streets. They arrive at some docks, and Michi cries knowing Yosuke's fate. She offers to take him back to Harue's remains to ease his pain, but they eventually get him onto a boat. Michi goes to the harbor to get the key, and on the way, a plane crashes in the distance. She obtains the key, and Yosuke manages to use his last bit of strength to drive the boat. We then see Michi on the ship we saw at the beginning of the film. The captain of the ship tells her they will journey to South America, as there are still signals there. Then we see Michi in her cabin. We hear her say now, she is alone with her last friend in the world, and she has found happiness, as Yosuke turns to ash. Finally, we see the ship floating in the vast ocean.
Sorry?
Now you've seen it, please like and subscribe. And remember, kids, when you're wandering alone in the middle of the night, don't just investigate a red tape door.